Now, I've mentioned repeatedly on this channel that I used to work on boats.
Ship.
And not only is that why I swear like a sailor, but that's also why I have a certain fascination with maritime mysteries and know a couple of things about the world of maritime travel. So, when I heard the very hard to believe story of the death ship, the SS Ourang Medan, the first thought that crossed my mind was it's bullshit.
It's not true. It's bullshit.
Now, it's not a very long story, nor is it very complicated, but somehow there is about 5,000 different versions of it. And the theories of what actually happened to the crew range from a chemical disaster, to pirates, to fucking sea monsters, to UFOs.
Oh shit, here we go again.
Fortunately though, unlike other mysteries, the story of the Ourang Medan can be debunked with good old-fashioned common sense. Now, up until recently, this story was believed to have first appeared in an article published in the Dutch-Indonesian newspaper called The Locomotive. And basically, the story goes like this. Sometime in June of 1947, or February 1948 depending on your source, an SOS signal was picked up by some ships sailing around the Marshall Islands in the Pacific Ocean. The SOS said, quote, "Mayday, Mayday, this is the Ourang Medan. We are sinking. I repeat, we are sinking." A nearby ship then radioed back and said, quote, "Hello, this is the German Coast Guard. What are you thinking about?" no, the SOS said, quote, "SOS from Ourang Medan. We float."
Bill, if you'll come with me, you'll float too. You'll float too. You'll float too. You'll float too. You'll float too.
All officers, including captain, are dead, lying in chart room and bridge. Possibly whole crew dead. This was then followed by some indecipherable Morse code, and then a final message was sent that said only, "I die." The nearby ships that heard this SOS were able to triangulate where the signal originated from and quickly identified the ship as the Dutch freighter, the SS Ourang Medan. Now remember that, the Dutch freighter, the SS Ourang Medan. Now at the time of the emergency, the SS Ourang Medan was apparently 400 nautical miles southeast of the Marshall Islands. Apparently, one of the two US merchant ships that heard the Ourang's SOS, the Silver Star, was the nearest ship, and so it sped over to assist with the emergency. Once the Silver Star arrived, they noticed that the Ourang's crew were nowhere to be seen. They then tried to get their attention with bells and whistles and hand signals, but there was no response. The Silver Star then assembled a boarding party and sent a couple of men onto the ship to investigate. After boarding the Ourang Medan, the rescuers discovered that the SOS message was indeed correct. Every member of the Ourang's crew was dead, and their bodies were scattered all over the ship. As the rescuers continued to search the ship for any signs of life, they made their way up to the bridge and found the captain and all of his officers dead too. Now this is where shit gets weird, because apparently all of the bodies still had their eyes open and their faces frozen and contorted as if they suddenly died screaming. Some of the bodies even had their arms outstretched towards the sky, as if they were reaching for something. Now this Dutch newspaper, The Locomotive, even featured this photograph, which was obviously captured on a potato. The caption below reads, quote, "Op die commanderbrug vonden wij de tweede officier. Ook hij was dood en niets vir het waaraan hij was gestorven." Luckily, I am South African, so I can actually translate that. It says, "On the command bridge we found the second officer. He too was dead, and nothing revealed what he died of." Unfortunately, I was not as lucky with the image because I tried reverse searching it and cannot find where it came from. But it could have come from fucking anywhere. Anyway, after the story was published in this 1948 Dutch newspaper, up until recently, the earliest known English reference to the story was actually published by the United States Coast Guard in their May 1952 issue of the Proceedings of the Merchant Marine Council. Their write-up said, quote, "There were dead men everywhere, the frozen faces upturned to the sun with mouths gaping open and eyes staring. The dead bodies resembled horrible caricatures. Silver Star's boarding party noted that even the ship's dog was dead, its face locked in a grimace that mirrored that of its master's. A trip to the communications room revealed the author of the SOS messages, also dead, his hand still on the Morse sending key, his eyes wide open and teeth bared. There was no sign of wounds or injuries on any of the bodies. The boarding party according to one source, felt intense cold when on the lower decks, end quote. Now, I have no idea why the Coast Guard decided to highlight this story, but if I could take a guess, it's probably because this Proceedings of the Merchant Marine Council thing was all about updating maritime regulations for safety, so it's about vessel inspections, navigation rules, equipment standards, and whatever. So perhaps it was a good example of how not to be killed by gas fumes. That's my best guess, but I don't know. Back to the story. Now, after discovering that all of the crew members were dead, the crew of the Silver Star then decided to hook the Ourang up and tow it back to the nearest port. But before they could, smoke began filling the ship. The rescuers quickly got back to the Silver Star and moved their ship away from the Ourang, fearing that a fire had broken out, but it was actually much worse than that, because the Ourang would explode. Apparently, the explosion was so powerful that the Ourang, quote, lifted herself from the water and swiftly sank. What are you thinking about? Now, even though this location was surely marked on a map by this rescue effort, the Ourang Medan has never been seen again. No bodies have washed up, the wreckage has never been found, and no one knows where the fuck this actually happened. But for a little exercise in common sense, I want to ask you something. When you hear a story like this, where do you think it came from?
I've heard stories. She's been preying on ships and settlements for near 10 years. Never leaves any survivors.
No survivors. Then where do the stories come from, I wonder?
Obviously, in this case, there were survivors. The crew from the Silver Star survived this. So is it not then a reasonable assumption to make that the crew of the Silver Star told this story when they returned to port and reported this to the Coast Guard or the port authorities? What are you, fucking stupid? This story was told by a survivor of the Ourang Medan who swam to shore and told it to a missionary and then died before he could give his name. According to the website the Skittish Library, who I believe has debunked this Ourang Medan mystery once and for all, quote, the tale had apparently originated from a surviving German crew member of the Ourang who swam ashore to Debunking Atoll in the Marshall Islands. There, he told his story to a missionary, who in turn told it to Silvio Shirley of Trieste, Italy. Also something important to remember. Now, the Silvio Shirley character was cited as the source for the story in the Dutch newspaper, The Locomotive. Okay, so a German crew member survived and he swam ashore. That's great and all, but what about the rescuers from the Silver Star? What did they say about this whole thing? Nothing! Not a goddamn fucking thing. There isn't a single report from anyone on the Silver Star about the Ourang Medan disaster. Now, if you know anything about seamen, hey, don't laugh. If you know anything about seamen, you know that we can't keep our fucking mouths shut. When you're on board as a crew member, you hear all kinds of stories about, oh, I was on this ship and this happened to me and whatever. A story like this would be told to everyone and anyone, yet we can't find a single report from anyone from the Silver Star. To me, as a former seafarer, I find that incredibly suspicious. But the survivor though, the survivor leads us to a very interesting paradox. So as the story itself claims, the story comes from a surviving German crew member who swam to Debunking Atoll. So how did the survivor who swam to Debunking Atoll know about what happened aboard the Ourang Medan if he was no longer there? And if he was still there, on board or even just swimming in the water, why did he not go back to port with the Silver Star instead of just swimming back? Because the story is bullshit. But I'm going to be fair, and I'm going to try to plug all the holes in this sinking ship of a story. The only realistic scenario for how this story could possibly make sense is the survivor is on the Ourang. He sees some shit happening on board the ship. I don't know, it's a chemical leak, a UFO. Davy Jones and all of his fish people from the Flying Dutchman come on board and start asking where Jack Sparrow is. Whatever it is, it doesn't matter. Then all of a sudden, all of the Ourang Medan's crew members drop dead. The survivor then looks at Davy Jones and says, you know, as my friends say in Canada, peace out. And he jumps overboard into the water. Davy Jones then chuckles and twirls a tentacle because he knows that this guy is gonna drown. Then a little while later, the survivor sees the Silver Star in the distance approaching the Ourang Medan. He's like, oh fuck, I swam all the way out here, now I gotta swim back. And before he gets back, the Ourang explodes and the Silver Star leaves. Now the German survivor is once again abandoned in the water 400 nautical miles from the Marshall Islands. He then swims 800 nautical miles or 1,481.6 kilometers to Debunking Atoll. He then tells his story to a missionary and then probably dies because he swam 1,481.6 kilometers. As you can see, this is an obvious problem because this is impossible. The world record for the longest non-stop unassisted swim is held by a guy named Neil Aegis, and Neil swam 125 kilometers in 50 hours. And that's very impressive. But Neil is still 1,356 kilometers short of our German survivor, who, by the way, does not hold the world record like Neil. Now let's say hypothetically that our survivor had a life jacket and a paddle. Well, sadly, a paddle is not going to help you much when you're swimming, and nor is a life jacket, because a life jacket's only job is to keep you floating. It's pretty shit to swim in them. But let's say that he had something that helped him. Doesn't matter what it is. The world record for the longest non-stop assisted swim is held by a guy named Ross Edgley, who swam 510 kilometers in the Yukon River over 54 hours. Now, according to basic Steiner math, Ross swam an average of 9.44 kilometers per hour. And everybody knows the general rule of thumb that if you don't drink any water for 72 hours, you're probably going to be swimming with Davy Jones and all his fish people. But what this means is that even if the German survivor swam back to the nearest point on the Marshall Islands, forget Debunking Atoll, if he swam to the Marshall Islands, he would have still needed to have swam 740 kilometers. At Ross's speed, the German survivor in 72 hours would have only covered 676.8 kilometers. So that means he's dead, from either dehydration, from exhaustion, or being eaten by something. Probably that shark guy that Davy Jones keeps around. However, according to the story, this guy somehow made it to Debunking Atoll and told the missionary about it. Okay, whatever. What else did this man who did not exist say before he died before telling anybody his name? Well, he said that the Ourang was carrying a badly stowed cargo of sulfuric acid, and that most of the crew died because of the poisonous fumes escaping from broken containers. Okay, firstly, the fuck do you mean most? Did some other crew members escape and survive? Where are they and what did they say? Did something else kill some of the other crew members? Is that what you're saying? Was it Davy Jones? I bet it was Davy Jones. My money is on Davy Jones. Now, according to the story again, the Ourang was sailing from an unnamed small Chinese port to Costa Rica and deliberately avoiding the authorities. And this is obviously the point where the German survivor died, because that's about all there is to the story.
Yeah, that's really about it. Yep.
Now, with all that said, even with this quote-unquote official version of the story, there isn't much room for speculation. As the story itself claims, the survivor himself said that most of the crew were killed by sulfuric acid fumes. However, people speculate anyway. Some people have suggested that pirates could have done this. Now, I've been joking about Davy Jones, but unless it really was him, most people don't see how pirates could have actually done this. Well, I mean, unless they came on board and deliberately sabotaged the containers housing the sulfuric acid and then just left. I suppose that that's not impossible, but a big part of the whole pirate thing is stealing shit and stabbing and shooting people, which doesn't seem to be what happened here since there were no visible injuries. So pirates are out.
Fuck off out of here!
Some people say that it was a sea monster. Those people need to fuck off.
Fuck off out of here!
Other people say it was UFOs. Those people also need to fuck off.
Fuck off out of here! Get out! Hey, excuse me, madam. Fuck me! How about fuck you?
This leaves us with the only realistic possibility of some kind of gas or chemical leak, like the survivor claimed in the first place. However, from the research that I've done on sulfuric acid fumes, they're not exactly odorless like some war gases. It sort of smells like sulfur, hence the name sulfuric acid. And you'd probably notice the smell before it was too late if these fumes escape from a container on a ship. The next problem is that while sulfuric acid fumes can seriously fuck you up, it's highly unlikely, if not impossible, that they will do to you what the story claims happened to the crew members, because that shit can take hours to days depending on how you're inhaling it. So unless every crew member was trapped in a tiny confined space and had nothing else to breathe but sulfuric acid fumes, it's quite unlikely that that is what killed everybody on board this freighter ship. Freighter ships are typically quite big, about 1,000 feet or about 300 meters long. So let's give the story another chance and try to plug this plot hole. If hypothetically, the Ourang Medan was transporting something else, something like the deadliest World War II gas, Zyklon B, then I would go as far as saying maybe. Now, even though we are overpowering the gas in the story, despite the fact that according to the official story, the survivors said that they had sulfuric acid on board and the fumes leaked, we must consider this about Zyklon B. Zyklon B was not used on the battlefield for several reasons, but one reason in particular was that it was not quite as good out in the open air, something that a freighter ship has a lot of in certain places. Now, if I may refer back to a line from the original story, quote, "There were dead men everywhere, the frozen faces upturned to the sun with mouths gaping and eyes staring. The dead bodies resembled horrible caricatures." So either they were staring up towards the sun, through the hull of the ship, or they were out on the open decks where they could actually see the fucking sun. And then somehow in the open air, they breathed in fumes that were so powerful and killed them so efficiently that they couldn't even abandon ship in time. I don't know. Even given this mystery the best possible chance was Zyklon B, it still makes no sense to me. But the guy said that they were carrying sulfuric acid, and sulfuric acid fumes are even less effective in open air. So I guess that chemicals can fuck off too.
You, fuck off out of here!
So, what really could have happened here? Well, in my opinion, nothing, because I don't think the story is real. In fact, that's actually what most people think. People have been searching for years to find some kind of proof of this ship's existence, and one of the easiest ways that you would typically do something like that is by going through a classification society like Lloyd's Register, for example. And what a fucking surprise! The Ourang Medan does not exist. There is no record of it at all in any classification society. Nor is there even a mention of the Ourang in the Dictionary of Disasters at Sea between 1824 and 1962. But again, let's try to fix this plot hole and give the story another chance. We know that maritime smuggling is still something that happens today, but the Ourang not being registered leads us to another very interesting paradox. Let's say, hypothetically, that the Ourang Medan can't be found in any classification society because the ship's name was changed without recording it and they just repainted the name on the bow or something. If the reason for the Ourang's existence was to transport illicit cargo and avoid the authorities, like the survivor claimed, then how the fuck was it supposed to have accomplished this? In order for a ship to land at any port in the world, it needs to be registered. If the Ourang pulls into port, the Coast Guard check the papers and see, hey, the name of your ship is actually the SS Bullshit, you're going to be in big trouble. If the ship is not registered correctly, then what you're doing is sailing a stateless vessel and are effectively a pirate.
Pirate, nay. Privateer.
Nay, Barbosa, a bloody idiot, because you run the risk of having your ship seized by the authorities. So basically, the ship would not be able to dock in Costa Rica like the survivor claimed it was going to. So therefore, if the story was true, the Ourang would have had to have resorted to some really difficult alternatives to unload this apparently very deadly sulfuric acid. Now I'm gonna give the story the benefit of the doubt one last time, because in 1948, Costa Rica did actually have a civil war. And since February 1948 is one of the many dates the story claims it took place on, I am assuming that the person who imagined this Ourang Medan story was possibly implying that the Ourang was delivering some chemicals to, I guess, aid one side of the war. However, the massive problem with my hypothesis is that Costa Rica's civil war started on March 12th and ended on April 24th, 1948 obviously. So that means that the Ourang Medan set sail for Costa Rica with this cargo of sulfuric acid before their civil war even started. Now, I understand that there could have been a build-up towards the Civil War, and maybe some people were planning on using the sulfuric acid to create some kind of chemical weapons. But there is no evidence that sulfuric acid or its derivatives were used in the Costa Rican Civil War. So what was the plan then? Was the Ourang just coming to Costa Rica to unload sulfuric acid so another ship could load it on and take it somewhere else? What the fuck is the point of that? The Ourang could have taken it anywhere. Or was the Ourang just delivering sulfuric acid to Costa Rica so they could use it what it was designed for, making fertilizers? If that's the case, then what the fuck is the big deal? I don't understand what the point of all of this is, because transporting sulfuric acid by ship is not illegal. It's just highly regulated, because the liquid is highly corrosive and it could cause damage to the environment, the ship, and the crew. But they didn't put a limit on how much of the stuff that you can carry, only that you carried it properly. So then, if the Ourang Medan was kept an unregistered stateless vessel because they wanted to transport legal sulfuric acid, that's just fucking stupid.
You're not making any sense at all.
Even if they were just in international waters and the ship got inspected, it would be seized, when they could have just registered it and been fine. In fact, that's what most modern maritime smugglers do. They have their ship registered, sometimes properly and sometimes through dodgy legal loophole shit, and then they'll hide the illicit cargo inside other containers that are labeled as something else and just fucking hope for the best and hope the Coast Guard don't come open the boxes and look through everything. That's how they do it. Therefore, it is my opinion that it would have been far easier for the Ourang Medan to be registered correctly and then discreetly smuggle illicit cargo like the dickheads on the Morro Castle did for Cuba. That's a fucking crazy story. Check out my Morro Castle video if you want another maritime mystery. But the fact remains, if the easier course of action was indeed to register the Ourang Medan correctly and then discreetly transport illicit cargo, there would be proof of its existence. Even if the owners of the ship changed its name, there would still be proof of that. As proof of that statement, here is proof that the name of the supposed rescue ship, the Silver Star, was changed. Now this is the part of the story where there are just too many holes to plug and it just sinks. Even though we can be fairly certain that the Ourang Medan never existed and this story is a pure fiction, the Silver Star Park was actually a real ship, and this is apparently the specific one referred to in the story. Yeah, for some reason the author of the story dropped the name Park and referred to the ship as the Silver Star. Although, Silver Star is not the most unique name for a ship. There are quite literally thousands of ships named Silver Star. But this one here is said to be the one. However, in 1948, the Silver Star Park was purchased by the Grace Line, renamed to the SS Santa Cecilia, and repositioned to Brazil. Now, I mentioned earlier that there are about 5,000 different versions of this story. Originally, the story is said to have taken place 400 nautical miles southeast of the Marshall Islands. Later, it got changed to the Straits of Malacca, 7,500 kilometers away from the Tawangi Atoll where the German survivor allegedly swam to. No fucking wonder he died. Now, if the Silver Star Park is really the first ship that responded to the Ourang, that means it would have needed to travel 23,000 kilometers to get there first. And that's if it could have sailed over the actual land of South America. Now, were there really no other ships closer that could have responded first? Apparently not. Now, I've been trying to give the story a fighting chance by plugging all the plot holes that I can. But even after trying to rationalize some things, I'm at the point now where I find it unbelievable that there are people in the world that actually believe that the story could be true. But some people do, because a German author wrote a 32-page book about it. Das Totenschiff in der Südsee, which when translated into English means the death ship in the South Seas. The author of this 32-page booklet was a guy by the name of Otto Milker. And in this publication, Otto alleged that the Ourang Medan actually sank in June 1947. Thank God! Finally a consistent detail. However, he says it sank in the South Sea. Not a consistent detail. Now, I assume that some people believe Otto because he clears up, I guess that's the wrong word, he mentions a lot of facts about the Ourang, like its route, its cargo, the ship's tonnage, its engine power, and even the captain's name. Even though that these are things that you could just make up, these actual quote-unquote facts from Otto are not public anywhere. I spent an entire evening looking for them and I couldn't find a reliable source on them anywhere. So good luck finding that, but Otto claims that the cargo was not actually sulfuric acid. So that German survivor who swam all the way to Tawangi Atoll must have suffered fucking brain damage or something, because according to Otto, the Ourang was actually carrying Cyankali, German for potassium cyanide, and it was supposedly mixed with nitroglycerin. And to Otto's credit, this combination can actually create highly toxic fumes and big explosions. However, there is no evidence that Costa Rica used Cyankali during their civil war, or any chemical weapons for that matter. So why was the Ourang taking this shit to Costa Rica? Maybe Otto's 32-page booklet can elaborate a bit further. Oh no, there are no ebooks available. Like I said, I spent an entire evening looking for a copy of this book, or at least a reliable source on the information in it, and I couldn't find it anywhere. So if you can, let me know. Actually, don't let me know. I don't give a fuck. Because I'm done with this story now, and I'm going to just prove to you that it is fake. According to the website Skittish Library, the Ourang Medan story was not first reported in February 1948, it was not first reported in June 1947, it was actually first reported in November 1940. Check this out. This newspaper article is from 1940, and I'll show you that in just a second. Let's read it first. Mystery SOS from Death Ship. Unwounded bodies found on deck. Explosions defeated boarding party. That sounds pretty familiar, doesn't it? An eyewitness account of the last phase of a mysterious sea tragedy has been brought to Trieste by a merchant marine officer who went to the rescue of the steamer Ourang Medan off the Solomon Islands last November. An SOS was flashed from the Ourang Medan asking for a doctor urgently, and later she asked for a warship. Now before you think, wow, what a coincidence. No, this is definitely the same ship. Let's carry on reading. This officer found ship's officers and crew dead on the deck with no visible wounds. He had to make a hurried escape when explosions set fire to the ship and burned her to the waterline. So, it's the same ship. The officer said we were about 200 miles southwest of the Solomon Islands when we intercepted the following signal. SOS from the steamship Ourang Medan. Beg ships with shortwave wireless get touch doctor. Urgent. With our shortwave set, we relayed the call for help. Medical stations in Germany, Rome, and France replied. We informed the Ourang Medan and asked her to transmit her request. Okay, now this article here is also from 1940 and it's a bit broken up, so I'm just going to read bits and pieces of it. Let's read from here. We made wild guesses at what had happened. Mutiny, piracy, prisoners' revolt. Now that's obviously just a little of that foreshadowing shit that newspapers do and some YouTubers in their intros, but that's irrelevant. At the end of the 16 hours, we sighted a big ship on the horizon. Told you it was big. It flew no flag, was listing slightly to starboard, and the propeller motionless. From our bridge, we could see it was the Ourang Medan. There was no sign of life on the quarterdeck and no reply to our shouts through a megaphone. We launched 2 lifeboats with 8 men in each and rowed across to the Ourang Medan and boarded her. Bodies of sailors were lying about on the deck. We could find no sign of a wound on any of them. Death seemed to have taken them by surprise at their posts. On the captain's bridge, we found the body of the second officer. We counted 12 bodies, 3 of them of deck officers, but we reckoned the Ourang Medan should have had a crew of about 40. The captain decided to search the officers' quarters, but we heard an explosion in the ship's hold. A column of smoke belched from the second hatchway. We rowed back to our ship. The explosions were repeated at short intervals, so we withdrew to a safer distance. Soon, nothing was left but the blazing hulk of the Ourang Medan. Now, I'm sure that you would agree that this is incredibly similar to the 1947 and 1948 version. And as you can clearly see here, this was printed in the Yorkshire Evening Post on November 21st, 1940. 7 years before the story supposedly even happened. Or what? Did it happen twice? Now, as the Skittish Library points out, the story is pretty similar, but there are also some major revisions. Firstly, there's no mention of how the dead crew looked. The Ourang was actually a steamship, not a freighter, and the request of a warship was dropped, probably because it made no sense now that World War II was over. But most importantly, the location has changed again. We are now near the Solomon Islands, 1,600 kilometers away from the Marshall Islands. Still an impossible swim for our survivor. But this time, the story doesn't come from a survivor, it comes from a responding seaman. And what's his name? First Officer Fucknose. It cannot be so difficult to keep the details in these stories consistent. This is some Ed Warren kind of shit. The only thing consistent in any of Ed Warren's stories was his name. Speaking of which, the only consistent detail in the Ourang Medan story is its source, Trieste. So allow me to allow the Skittish Library to land the killing blow on this mystery. Quote, the only common thread is that the information comes from Trieste. Trieste is the crucial link. as we can therefore assume that Silvio Shirley of Trieste is the same person involved in this story, as he was in the later version. If he was the source of the 1940 story, then there's simply no way that he could have truthfully reported on the matter again in 1948, describing it as a new incident. The Dutch newspaper The Locomotive stated clearly that the entirety of its information came from Silvio Shirley. The Locomotive, which released the story in installments, ended its series with a very skeptical quote. This is the last part of our story about the mystery of the Ourang Medan. We must repeat that we don't have any other data on this mystery of the sea, nor can we answer the many unanswered questions in the story. It may seem obvious that this is a thrilling romance of the sea. On the other hand, the author Silvio Shirley assures us of the authenticity." End quote.
Me, I'm dishonest. And a dishonest man you can always trust to be dishonest. Honestly, it's the honest ones you want to watch out for, because you can never predict when they're going to do something incredibly stupid.
So given the fact that the 1940s version is so similar to the 1947 and 1948 version, and both stories come from a source in Trieste, it would appear that both of these stories came from one guy, Silvio Shirley. So Shirley, he got a taste for embellishing his story as the years went on, adding the staring eyes and contorted faces and screaming mouths and changing the location, presumably because Ourang Medan literally translates to Man of Medan, Medan being the capital and largest city of the Indonesian province Sumatra. So it seems that it made more sense to change the location of the story to Medan, which is right there by the Malacca Strait, where the ship sank in one version of the story. Back to the Skittish Library, quote, "In the end, my theory is that Silvio didn't quite get the notoriety he sought the first time round. The news buried by the events of the ongoing World War. Perhaps he sat on it until the war ended, world news quietened down, and then he tried again." End quote. Surely this guy was just trying to create a Flying Dutchman-like ghost story. But for what purpose? Who fucking knows? Maybe to sell books. It's always, the goal is always money, isn't it? Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this story, even though it was a big load of bullshit. Anyways, make sure to leave your thoughts and theories in the comment section, like the video, subscribe for more, and I'll catch you guys again soon with another mystery. Thanks for watching.